My name is Rich and I am an alcoholic. Tonight I celebrate 15 years since my last drink. AA saved my life and showed me how to live life on life's terms. I am truly able to live happy, joyous, and free. My life is filled with serenity and peace. I have discovered what true happiness and real love are. All of AA's promises have come true in my life. I couldn't have done it without my higher power, all of you in AA, and of course my wife. For me, alcoholism was not a progressive disease. I could never drink socially. I always drank to get drunk and escape my feelings, whether happy, sad, depressed, lonely, or whatever the emotion was. It was happy hour for my brain when alcohol was available. I'm Italian and Irish and was born in Brooklyn, New York, so I had my first beer when I was still in diapers. My Uncle Danny thought it would be funny to give me a glass of beer. I drank half of it and then proceeded to eat the glass. I still have the scars in my mouth from my first beer. If only I had learned at an early age that alcohol equals pain, my life would have been so different. How fitting that I now wear the scars from my last drunken escapade, I pray, on my face. One of my earliest memories of drinking was the '69 World Series. We had front row seats, and the Mets won. All I can remember was the ice-cold beer and the hot dog. I was 6 years old. My parents were alcoholics and drug users trying to raise 4 kids. We were not raised with a sound moral compass. I remember going on a family outing with 2 cars, dumping one in a swamp, and going to McDonald's afterwards. I also remember collecting for the March of Dimes and keeping it all. Honesty was not the best policy in our house. My grandma died when I was 11. She was our world and basically raised us while my parents were out drinking and drugging. My mom opened a bunch of bottles of wine and let us all drink. I drank until I passed out. For the next few months I would drink to try to kill the pain of losing her. That's how I was taught to handle emotions. You drank them away. Later that same year, my parents got religion. They threw out all the alcohol and drugs, and we went from going to church twice a year to almost every day. Dad had to sell our house in New York to pay $1 million claim because he had lapsed a woman's policy early, and God told him it was the right thing to do. I was so mad at God. Our parents moved us from New York to Deer Lake, Pennsylvania, a town of 206 with us included. I didn't fit in, to say the least. All the kids were in jeans, and here I am in my little red suit, hair slicked back. Our cousins lived down the hill from us. They had a keg and a bar in the basement, so we spent a lot of time over there. When I was 14 years old, our parents took us to Jesus 77. It's like a Christian Woodstock. There's 40,000 people camping. Our dad was the MC. We got to meet Debbie Boone, Amy Grant, Jim and Tammy Baker, was crying with her makeup running down her face. All of us kids were partying in the mountains. I tried pot, but it made me sick after all the booze we had. All of my jobs were based upon how much I could drink. No one drank more than a construction worker, so that was a good start. But I worked that for a couple years. I fell off a roof drunk, so I decided to go to electronics school to open my own TV repair business. Working on high voltage drinking sounded like a great plan. So I drank my way through college. Right before I was ready to graduate, I went over to my brother-in-law's house, and he was in the Marine Corps, and no one drank more than a U.S. Marine. And he was a Marine recruiter, so he recruited me to join the service. So I became a Marine. He died drinking and driving a year later. He left my sister and her 2 young children. The Marine Corps sent me to a Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado for a 2-year course. I met my future wife, who was my drinking buddy. She said I couldn't leave Colorado without a ring, and being married meant more money in my paycheck. So a week later we wed at the courthouse. I had no clue what love was. The Marine Corps sent me to Japan. I drank so much in the first week I gave myself a GI bleed and had to be flown to the Philippines for surgery. I remember unhooking the IV, going out in town and drinking, coming back at 5 a.m., trying to put the IV back in my arm with my surgery scheduled at 8. Total insanity. A few weeks after that, I went to a Navy party, drank their garbage can punch. I had two 64-ounce cups of it. I fell off the bar stool and wasn't breathing. A big Navy guy performed CPR. I wound up dying several times that night in the ambulance and at the Japanese hospital from alcohol poisoning. The Japanese doctor said I had an abnormal brain and showed me the CT scan. At 25, I had developed an alcoholic brain. I was released 2 weeks later with a broken sternum and ribs from the CPR and ordered by my commanding officer never to drink on his base again. I said, "Aye, sir." I immediately went to the Seabees barracks where I had gotten so drunk to thank the Navy guy who performed the CPR and proceeded to get hammered with him on beer this time. I decided to switch to beer and wine with a few shots of something nasty to ensure I threw up if I had too much. Dying was no fun. In 1991, they sent me to Desert Storm. I got sick from the war. All my joints hurt. I developed a stutter and had memory loss. They tried all kinds of pills to stop my pain. It didn't work, so I had an excuse to drink every night. I was medically discharged from the Corps 3 years later. In 97, my wife gave me the ultimatum to quit drinking where she was leaving. I couldn't quit drinking, so I got divorced. After a year and a half of passing out every night by myself, I was so lonely, miserable, and grief-stricken, I figured I needed someone in my life. I met a woman online and then in person at an AOL party. I moved her and her 2 boys, ages 8 and 11, in with me after the first date. And within 2 weeks from meeting, we got married. She had a bad cocaine problem and was out dating while I was babysitting. 3 months and $70,000 later, I was happy to be divorced again. Now that was one hell of an expensive blackout. I received 2 DUIs in 3 months. They rolled both DUIs together, took away my license for a year, 10 days in jail. I spent 10 days in a cell with a guy who killed a mother and child drinking and driving. I knew I had to either give up drinking or driving. I quit driving a car. They also sentenced me to antabuse for a year, alcohol rehab, and 18 AA meetings. I couldn't stop drinking. It was the only way I knew to live. So I skipped out on the antabuse, the rehab, the 8 AA meetings, and tried a geographical cure. I moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, and went to work for a billionaire from my house. The more I drank, the more weight I would gain, the more it would take to make me pass out. I blew up to 300 pounds, eating 5 Lean Cuisine pizzas a week. I switched to light beer and lost 100 pounds. In 2005, I moved to Florida to be close to my nephew. After nearly 10 years on a bike, I wanted to drive a car again. I was tired of falling off my bike drunk. I was court-ordered to attend 18 AA meetings in '98, so I had to do those in order to get my license back in 2005. On December 10th of 2005, my sister called and asked if I could watch my nephew while she went out. I said, "Sure, no problem, I'll be right over." I hopped on my Jeep Cherokee bicycle, which has a weed whacker engine, and woke up on the side of the road with the EMTs over me, a nasty head wound, broken ribs, and a serious case of road rash. It was 10:30 a.m. and I was plowed. They were loading me in the ambulance when I came to and refused medical attention. My sister was a nurse working at Jupiter Medical Center ER. She came over and glued my eyebrow back on with Dermabond, told me I should just get a gun and kill myself rather than drink myself to death. On December 14th of 2005, I crawled into my first AA meeting ever with what would look like an open head wound, broken ribs, and I identified myself as a problem drinker. Someone from the Living Sober group in Hopestown, Florida gave me a very tiny big book. That little book changed my life. Not because I read it, but because it had Living Sober written on it. I kept up my problem drinking, and on January 7th of 2006, my nephew saw the Living Sober written on the little big book and asked me, "How long have you been living sober?" with such a look of concern on his face. That really hit home. I've been drinking since I was his age. I quit drinking on January 8th of 2006. On January 9th of 2006, I picked up my first and only white chip. My life in sobriety. I got a sponsor and started working steps 1 through 3. Was told I had to be rigorously honest in order to stay sober, make 90 meetings in 90 days. No relationships for the first year. No problem, said a guy riding a Jeep Cherokee bike with a motor who hadn't been in a relationship for 10 years. I made it 3 weeks, and Pam offered me a ride to the spaghetti dinner. We started dating a week later. Yep, 3 weeks sober, and I definitely had no clue what love is. My first sponsor called me out for working the 13th step in front of a bunch of other AA members. I had to look up what the 13th step was. I fired him. I thought he was working for Heineken anyways. I got a new sponsor, Dan, who eventually became my best friend. I walked into the DMV with my completed ADAP sheet and said, "Hi, my name is Rich, and I am an alcoholic." She looked at me, smiled, and gave me my license with a safe driver stamp. I became the coffee maker for 3 days a week for 4 years. I worked the steps, made meetings almost every day. I started a successful business with Pam. We got engaged a year later. Just before our wedding, she was diagnosed with throat cancer. We spent 3 months going through chemo and radiation in Gainesville. Upon coming home, Pam went to stay with a friend's house. And I was calling her that night, and she didn't answer. Her friend called me the next morning. She said she had crushed her OxyContin, and that Pam wouldn't stop talking, so she gave her 8 of her own Xanax, and she was non-responsive. I told her to call 911. Me and my sponsor, Dan, beat the ambulance to the hospital. She arrived with doll eyes. Her brain scan said she was gone. They put her on life support. My sister and the doctor were crying. I said my first real prayer to God. "Oh God, no, not this. Please, not this." And a calm came over me, or else I was in shock. I would like to believe it was God's peace and grace. One of our clients was a pastor in a mega church with over 10,000 people, and they all prayed for Pam. A week later, we were told to say our goodbyes as they removed the ventilator. As they were removing the tube, she opened her eyes, and she said, "No visitors." God had brought Pam back to life. Pam had major brain damage, and she worked hard to come back. A year later, they discovered lung cancer, and she started treatment for that. For 5 years, we went through cancer treatments and clinical trials. AA was there for us with love and support through our journey. Her son got out of prison and moved in with us. We clashed. I was now a caretaker and a warden. I offered to rent him a house. Pam had to take care of her son. And at that point, her health was very bad. She broke up with me and moved out with her son. Dan was always there for me. I learned what true love really is. We went to meetings almost every day. Afterwards, we would grab dinner.
Ed and Rich, it looks, I tripped over Anna, and I've got some bleeding on my brain. It's there. I'm seeing a neurosurgeon tonight. It should be, and they said it's nothing to worry about. They're just going to keep me for observation. Probably be released tomorrow morning. It's not a big deal. I mean, anytime you're in a hospital is a big deal, but don't worry about me. I'm in good hands. Liz, of course, is right here by my side, so all is well. And I guess I'll have to watch the Super Bowl. or whatever movie's running opposite it. Things are good. I love you both. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you later. God bless you.
Dan had metastatic prostate cancer in all his bones and was in extreme pain. So God spared him all that pain. A few months after Dan passed, Ed, a 70-year-old in the program, told me about an online dating site at our dinner after the meeting. I was ready to find real love, so I posted my profile. God sent me an angel. Her name is Donna. Her family welcomed me with open arms. We have been together over 8 years, and every day I love her more. This should be the happy